The Minnesota Vikings have a very good team, but J.J. McCarthy remains a massive mystery. We'll discuss on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the mastermind, Ross Jackson. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what exactly the Las Vegas Raiders' vision is now. We're going to talk about if the Patriots can get the most out of Drake Maye this year, but we'll start with the mystery in Minnesota with J.J. McCarthy. Say that 5 times fast, folks. But with that, we do got to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day, and being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, because it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Ross, I have to be honest. When we talk about the mystery that is the Minnesota Vikings, we know how good the situation is. We know how good the environment is, what they did last year with a guy like Sam Darnold. You look at Kevin O'Connell as a coach and Brian Flores on defense. Like, that's one of the best coaching staffs with the supporting cast and the talent they have. Minnesota is clearly one of the top 10, maybe even top 5, like, situations in the NFL. But J.J. McCarthy remains a big mystery, and if I'm honest with you, I wasn't a believer in J.J. McCarthy coming out of college. I'm not a believer in J.J. McCarthy now. So I think the biggest question for the Vikings by far is, what are we going to see from J.J. McCarthy? But if I had to give you what I think the answer to that is, I don't think that he's the one.
Oh, interesting. So here's the thing. I completely agree with everything that you said, except the last part, that he's not the one. Because here's the thing. Okay. Here's the thing. I also was not a big believer in J.J. McCarthy coming into the NFL. You know who else I wasn't a big believer of coming into the NFL? Sam Darnold. You know who else I wasn't a believer of throughout his entire tenure in the NFL? Sam Darnold. You know who else I'm still not a believer in? Sam Darnold. But you know who I am a believer in? Kevin O'Connell. And so for me, the big piece is, and this has always been my thing when it comes to young quarterbacks or quarterbacks that I have questions about, that any quarterback can work if you get them with the right head coach. Now, that obviously is not 100%. Some quarterbacks were never going to make it.
There's a line. Okay.
Right. Jamarcus Russell was never going to make it. You know what I mean? Jameis Winston was always going to be what Jameis Winston is, regardless of what coach. But you saw him look really good with Sean Payton for 7 games. And so the idea for me is that a quarterback ceiling is almost always determined by their environment. And so even though I don't believe or didn't believe in J.J. McCarthy as a first round pick or as a top 15 pick in the 2024 NFL draft, I do believe in Kevin O'Connell. And so I do think that even though the major question mark is the most important question mark you can have in football, I feel like the environment is perfect for that question mark to potentially be answered with an exclamation point because of Kevin O'Connell.
But that's what I like the most. I love clarity in things. I like to have our answers. And I think because of the situation that J.J. McCarthy is in, you're right. Like, we're going to have a pretty good idea of whether this guy is good enough or not. And actually, I just had that conversation about Michael Penix. Like,
right.
You know, Aaron Freeman on Locked On Falcons was making the point that, you know, the supporting cast around Michael Penix is so-so. And I look at it, and I look at their O-line and their weapons and what they have, and I'm like, I feel the opposite. Like, we're going to know whether Michael Penix is good enough because the Atlanta Falcons offense has so much talent. Now, that's even more true with Minnesota because the talent is even better and the coaching staff is even more certified and stamped. But I think it's funny that you've mentioned some other quarterbacks. I've mentioned some other quarterbacks. And my guy, Luke Braun, the brain, actually talked recently about some comparisons for J.J. McCarthy.
The one you want to hear is Joe Burrow. his deep accuracy was maybe the primary knock on him coming out of in like the scout. If you go back and look up like Joe Burrow scouting reports, everybody says, spotty accuracy deep. There was still a lot of explosiveness in that LSU offense. Like it would still hit enough where it might not have felt like it, but that was what I didn't really participate in that discourse. So I don't have a great sense for like what I thought of Joe Burrow coming out of college. I don't really pay attention to him till the Super Bowl year, since it's an AFC team. But that he seems to have a very similar kind of, hey, the arm strength isn't great. The talent isn't necessarily there. Is he the guy or isn't he the guy? But I think regardless, nobody would look at the Cincinnati Bengals and be like, Joe Burrow can't throw deep now. So that I think answers all your questions. But you could come up with a myriad of other quarterbacks that had bad deep accuracy that didn't work out because maybe they didn't have any accuracy at all. Just generally inaccurate quarterbacks, but mostly, what comes to mind are quarterbacks that are known now as like conservative backup types, Mac Jones, Teddy Bridgewater, that, they couldn't throw the deep ball and therefore like that kind of held them back from ever being explosive. The hope is that JJ McCarthy can be explosive and they are going to throw deep. It's Kevin O'Connell. This is not going to be a conservative offense. But the question is, will he be able to like make good on that? Will he be efficient with that sort of deeper A dot? And I think that's why they're working on like his mechanics and stuff.
See, this goes to the point we were just making about having an answer. If they are going to ask him to consistently do something that is a question mark, even we're talking about the question mark of him as a player in this situation, but you dive deeper into him as a player, what the question marks are. And if Luke is bringing up the deep accuracy and saying, hey, Kevin O'Connell's going to test that. He's going to do that. It's what he wants to do. It's like, okay, we're getting all of our answers on JJ McCarthy. And when he talks about those comparisons, Joe Burrow has one of the most elite instinctual feels we have ever seen from a quarterback. The way he slides, he's not as athletic as Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, but he slides through the pocket and makes plays otherwise. His anticipation, his read for the defense is so at elite levels that he doesn't have to have the bazooka arm that those guys have. Okay, well, the odds of J.J. McCarthy having that level of those things to make up for is just so low regardless of the situation that he's put in. So that's why I'm not a believer. I don't think that he's going to be good enough for Minnesota to feel comfortable with him being the long-term answer. I think it's going to be one of these Tua situations, in my opinion, at best. And I think the names that he mentioned, it does make you worried, but I think J.J. McCarthy does look like more of a good long-term backup, like a Gardner Minshew type.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I want to see how this all pans out. Look, this is something that Luke was just talking about, A dot. A dot is average depth of target. For those that don't know what it is, what that means is how far downfield you're throwing a football effectively before it's caught, yards before a catch kind of a situation. And JJ McCarthy's A dot, or average depth of target, was 10.1 over the course of his Michigan career. Last year with the Minnesota Vikings, Sam Darnold, who had an absolutely outstanding year, was 9.3. And so these deep shots that they're discussing and that they're talking about in the Kevin O'Connell offense are ones that are meant to be utilized in ways that are going to be beneficial for the quarterback, not necessarily ask them to do something that's entirely out of their depth. No pun intended with the depth pun there. But, look, 75 attempts deep when it came to Sam Darnold last year in that Minnesota Vikings offense. I don't think that that's going to be unmanageable for a young quarterback with a young arm who threw 46 in his final year up with the Michigan Wolverines and has many more before that. I don't think that it's going to be something that's going to ask him to play so far out of his depth so consistently that it's going to be a big issue. But you're right. You'd rather certainty than question. And it is absolutely a question when this all comes down to it.
Yeah, and I think we go back to San Francisco, in my opinion, is when they went up to get Trey Lance. The reason that you move up or you take a quarterback like this is not just you don't want J.J. McCarthy just to be Sam Darnold. I know there are Vikings fans out there who say, oh, if he could just be as good as Sam Darnold, but, he's our guy and we can lock him up and all that, and then that's good. But that's not the truth. You can't be just as good as Jimmy Garoppolo when you trade up for Trey Lance. The reason you do that is because you want someone who can elevate your team. And I'm just not convinced. And J.J. McCarthy was not that in college either. He got minimized by the Wolverines for them to win their title. He didn't maximize his teammates. He was maximized by his environment. That can happen in Minnesota, but is that what you're hoping for, where they got him and the way that it happened? I'm not certain, but what we can both agree on is he's the biggest question for the Vikings, and we should have a pretty good answer by the end of the year. But what's the answer on Drake Maye with Mike Vrabel in charge? We got to figure that out. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. We've all been there. You're logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with stress and ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting to concerts and getting tickets to those concerts even easier and faster than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Listen, I love Gametime. I've purchased NFL, NBA, WNBA, MLB tickets all on Gametime, but I've also purchased comedy tickets on Gametime. I've purchased multiple different concerts of tickets, concerts, whatever, you know what I mean, on Gametime. It truly is fantastic, and they have the best features in the industry. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Ross, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We're looking at the biggest question for multiple teams in the NFL going into training camp. And hey, training camp is less than 20 days away for most teams. A couple of teams even earlier than that. Absolutely fantastic. But hey, enjoy your summer as well. But we'll see if the New England Patriots enjoyed their summer when they get back. We know Stephon Diggs is going to enjoy his summer. That we can count on. But Drake Maye with Mike Vrabel is a big question mark that I have, and whether that makes sense, I guess, and how it's all going to play out. Mike Vrabel, to me, would be a better coach with a more ready-made to compete roster. Like, Vrabel is the perfect guy to drop onto a roster that is ready to compete, but isn't being maximized by their coaching staff. I thought, like, the Chargers. I know they went with Harbaugh, and it was pretty clear they were going to do that, but that would have been a good fit. The Falcons, I think, would have been a great fit for Vrabel, because I think they have a lot more talent than what their coaching staffs have been getting out of the team. But Vrabel with a young team like the Patriots to kind of build it up in a young quarterback. Josh McDaniels has had some success, but he's had some failures as well. I guess I just wonder, I think the biggest question for me with the Patriots is this coaching staff truly what's best for Drake Maye? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely the biggest question around the New England Patriots. I remember during the season last year, there was a commentator, I think it was Kirk Herbstreit, who shared a story about Mike Vrabel like screaming at his kindergartner and everything like that for not picking up a blitz or something, and like yelling at little kids and some of that. And I think about that, and I think about like putting Mike Vrabel in on a roster or ahead of a roster that is really young. There's some veteran pieces on it, don't get me wrong, but it's a very young roster. It's a very young quarterback. And so how are those personalities going to mix? Is Mike Vrabel the guy that can, I'll use your word from the last conversation, maximize the newest generation of NFL player? Or is he better fit for the more veteran-filled roster or the more evenly mixed roster? And that's going to be a big, big, big answer that the New England Patriots are hoping is yes. But I think we're going to learn that one pretty early, Tyler. I think that's going to be pretty evident as the season begins.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about how the environment for a quarterback creates the ceiling for that quarterback, and more comparisons. I guess that's the name of the game right now. But Locked On Patriots, my guy Nick talked about Drake Maye and maybe some comparison.
The Daniel Jones floor thing drives me nuts. Daniel Jones. I know that there were some comparisons to Jones with Maye when Maye was coming out. when you look at Jones, the first thing about Daniel Jones that holds him back as an NFL quarterback, and maybe he'll be much better this year in Indianapolis if he wins the job from Anthony Richardson, but the key to Jones being limited is his arm strength. He does not have a very strong arm. Maye has a strong arm. And that's such a huge difference between those two talents. If somebody has a very good arm and somebody has a manageable arm, the very good arm is much more likely to succeed. And then I look at Maye's intangibles, and I wonder if Jones has the level of compete that Maye has. We know that Maye is a feisty competitor. He will fight, fight, fight. I haven't seen that from Jones. Maye comes across as an alpha, somebody who will control the room, somebody who knows how to talk to the room, somebody who his teammates will follow him. Jones really hasn't given that alpha aura off since he was drafted by the New York Giants. And then you have Jones, who literally becomes a puddle against pressure. And we saw Maye in his rookie season face as much pressure as anybody has faced. Maybe you got to go back to the David Carr days in Houston, but Maye handled that pressure pretty well.
Listen, I'm not on the ground and dealing with the Patriots day in and day out like Nick is, of course, our local expert for Locked On Patriots. But I'm kind of with him on that. Like, Drake Maye has more talent than Daniel Jones. He may not be as much of a runner, but you remember, I certainly do, Drake Maye running around for 11 seconds last year against the Titans to score that final touchdown and tie the game. Like, Drake Maye has plenty enough of athleticism. I do think he has a bigger, stronger arm than Daniel Jones, although I never thought Daniel Jones had, like, a bad arm by any stretch. Sure. I thought he was always kind of physically fit, but the mental aspects. Now, huge. I'm not there every day, so I can't speak to Drake Maye's aura as well, obviously. But what he said about Daniel Jones is true. I do know that from seeing him. Daniel Jones does not have that kind of swagger about him, that leadership about him. And listen, we're not in the locker room to, see how he interacts with his teammates all the time, but you can kind of just tell by the way that they carry themselves out on the field and the stories you hear. You could tell that maybe Daniel Jones doesn't have that electricity to him that brings people together. But I just can't say confidently yet that Drake Maye does either. Like, I don't know that yet. So if Nick is right and that is real about Drake Maye, then like you said, we should know. But I guess my big question is, can Drake Maye do that? How much can they get out of him? I don't know that I have my answer to that part of it yet, although I feel like I do have some of the other answers he talked about.
Yeah, I'm perfectly willing to say that Drake Maye is light years ahead right now in his second year where Daniel Jones will finish his career. I am very confident in that. But you're right. I mean, a big part of this conversation that Nick is having is around who he is as a leader, which unfortunately we only get to see snapshots of at best, right? I get it. Like, there will be the pregame speeches and the riling guys up on the sideline and the performances on the field, another version of leadership, lead by doing. There will be those that we get to see, but truly, that is just a snapshot of what leadership is for these NFL quarterbacks.
Small part of it, really.
Very small. What are they like in the locker room? Not even the locker room. What are they like in the film room?
Yes.
What are they like in, on the practice field when we don't get to see them in practice? You got to remember that even when media, and this is ubiquitous, royal you, not you, ubiquitous you. Got to remember that even when media, quote unquote, sees practice, we're watching them stretch and we're taking attendance. Like, that's really all that we're seeing. You know what I mean? Maybe some special teams drills and some individual work, but we're not watching them do full team reps and all these other things. And so what is that player like in those situations? What is that player like when their wide receiver is dealing with something in their life and the phone rings at 2 a.m. in the morning because the leader of that team is the guy that his teammates turn to off the field just as much as they turn on the field? Like, these are the things that we don't ever see and don't ever hear about. So what is he like in those moments? If he stands up in those moments, I think he'll earn very quickly the respect of Mike Vrabel, and that will maybe create a little bit more symbiosis there. But if he's Daniel Jones-like, which I don't think that he is, Mike Vrabel's going to pull him off the field quickly, I imagine. That would be an easy decision for Mike Vrabel, I'd bet.
Yeah, and Mike Vrabel would want to send a message to the team, too, if it was something like that.
Yep.
But I don't, I know that we're just going over what could happen, but I don't have those concerns with Drake Maye. To me, his floor is higher than Daniel Jones.
Agreed.
It's the
I think his
ceiling that
floor
is the
higher.
question.
I think Drake Maye's floor is higher than Daniel Jones's ceiling. But you're right. The question is, how high is Drake Maye's ceiling? Right.
Yes, and that'll be about environment. Here's just a quick question. Mm-hmm. I just wondered, since Daniel Jones has been in the conversation, would you feel more confident in Drake Maye with Brian Daboll if he was on the Giants right now versus him being with Mike Vrabel?
That's such a good question. I would feel
my answer is Brian Daboll. I would
think so.
Got a playoff win with Daniel Jones.
Right. I would certainly feel more confident about Drake Maye than Daniel Jones with Brian Daboll. Like, I'd feel more comfortable for Brian Daboll in that situation. But I do think I would feel more comfortable for Drake Maye with Brian Daboll. Offensive mind, offensive driven head coach, has found success with lesser quarterbacks, all those other things. And, in a better, kind of figure out the situation there. But I think I would. Like, if you took Brian Daboll and Mike Vrabel and swap places with them, that might be better for both organizations, if we're being honest.
Yeah, I honestly think it would. Honestly, that's crazy. But it's interesting that we both feel that way, because who's a better NFL football coach, Brian Daboll or Mike Vrabel?
I would say, I know that the record maybe speaks differently, but I would say Mike Vrabel.
All right, fine. I thought I had a point. Okay. Yeah, you do agree with me. Yeah, it's Mike Vrabel. So it's just funny how we've been talking about circumstances and environment and how it makes such a big impact. And we could be like, oh, I trust this quarterback better with this coach, but that coach is probably worse than this coach. It's just so interesting the way that it works. It's why it's the best game in the world. But speaking of coaching, speaking of quarterbacks, we got new ones at both spots in Las Vegas, and apparently they have their vision planned out. All right, Ross, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL, doing our biggest question series, and we've gotten through 3/4 of the NFL at this point in time, which means training camp is right around the corner. Again, make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. Again, training camp right around the corner. Moves are still being made, as we saw this week. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We talked about the Las Vegas Raiders, who I think could be one of the more interesting teams this year, depending on how things go. To me, they're a boom or bust team. Either they're going to be a lot better than people think, and Pete Carroll and Ashton Genty, and they're going to be really exciting, and it's going to be like, whoa, the Raiders, blah, 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 they're going to compete, or it's just going to be so boring because things just stay the way that they've been. But one thing that there aren't questions about in Vegas is what the vision is for this team, and your boy Q recently talked about that on Locked On Raiders.
I can see the vision in Vegas, even if it's not fully formed yet. Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers offer a strong combination in the passing game, and Ashton Genty can tie it all together on the ground, with hopefully some big play potential remaining in Raheem Mostert's legs. Laugh if you want, but new offensive coordinator Chip Kelly had some explosive results in Philadelphia, particularly on the ground. I'm intrigued to see what he could do with a backfield this talented. The Raiders need more depth at the skill position, but this is a solid starting point for the Pete Carroll era. And like you said, I could see the vision in Vegas, which to me, when I read that, I'm like, wow, there's actually a vision being seen, right? Because, how many times have we talked about the plan? Don't just have a plan, have the plan. And none of us knew what the plan was. At least you could see the vision.
So if we know what the vision is, which we do, you hire Pete Carroll, you want to win right away. You get Geno Smith back, who's 34-35. That's a win now move. You draft a running back high in the draft. Win now move. If they paid Max Crosby this offseason, all that stuff. If we know what the vision is in Vegas, which is compete right away, do you believe in the vision? I guess would be the biggest question for me.
Yeah, I believe in the vision. I don't believe that they will be successful in the result. But I do think that what they need to have as a part of their process, what they need to have as a part of what their goals are going into 2025, that they're not just saying things, that they're making the moves that represent those things, as you just highlighted. I think that means a lot to the team and to the players that are on that roster, guys that are going to go out there and potentially fight for other jobs with other teams all throughout training camp and the preseason and all those things. I think that that's where the vision for me matters and where the vision for me does make sense. I don't know that they're going to be successful in it. They're in a tough division with the Chiefs, with the Chargers, and with an improved Denver Broncos team as well. That's a division that's going to cannibalize itself, and one team is going to have to be at the bottom of that division, and it could very well be the Raiders, but the result is going to be its own conversation. I think the vision going into the season is very clear, and I think that that's a comfortable situation for Las Vegas.
Yeah, I think you got to feel good about it. I think here's where I come down. I actually do believe in the vision in terms of them being a competitive team this year. I think I could see the Raiders 7-10 to 10-7. I think they could be similar to like the Seahawks from last year, for example, or the Arizona Cardinals from last year, for example. I think they could be like that level of competitive football team. The problem that I have is just the ceiling of the team. What is the ceiling of this approach? Right. And it comes down to the ownership. You know, does Mark Davis just want to have a more competitive, fun team than what they had last year with their quarterback situation? And Antonio Pierce not seeming to quite be ready for the big chair quite yet. I think that they may just want to, like, we just need to be a better product right now, even if it means, you know, even because we didn't have Super Bowl aspirations or potential last year either. It's not like we're sacrificing some long-term possibility to do all these things. So I'm actually okay with what they're doing. They didn't have a lot of other recourse, but I still think the reality here is they're never going to win a Super Bowl with Geno Smith. Like so they can use this as an opportunity, which is what NFL teams don't legitimately tank. What they do is they have placeholder veterans until they can find a better opportunity to fix that problem. That's literally what teams do in the NFL because they don't want to tank because it's so bad for business. So I think the Raiders are kind of stuck, but I think they are going to be a more competitive, fun football team this year. And if that was truly the goal behind the scenes, then they accomplished that goal, in my opinion. I believe in that vision, and I think it's going to work. They're going to be more competitive.
Yeah, it's so easy sometimes for teams to get stuck in the trap of being okay with being in the middle, right? Of being okay with being the 15th best team that just barely missed out on the playoffs because of an overtime loss or some injury that cost you a game or something like that. It can be easy to kind of get comfortable in that spot, continue selling tickets to a product that people aren't sure about. And so people buy tickets based on the potential and all those other things. What I like about what the Raiders are doing is that they're at least putting forth a concerted effort to not be stuck in the middle. And they might end up stuck in the middle, and that's okay. But they're showing you that they're not comfortable with it, that they're not just going to say that this is okay. And that instead, now what they can do with Geno Smith for a year or two is build a team around the quarterback position and then find the quarterback to plug in to that space and be in a much better situation. I actually like that the Raiders forewent or chose to forego the idea of trying to plug in, you know, a top highly drafted rookie quarterback over the course of the past couple of years, because what were you plugging them into? There was nothing to build. There was nothing built around the position. At least now you have the opportunity to build and develop around the quarterback position until, like you said, you find that right quarterback to plug in.
Ross, I think the honest answer is here. There are two ways to build a football team. There are two ways in the NFL. You get to pick. Now, there are different little things you switch in and out, but either you have a terrible team, you get a top pick, you take a rookie quarterback, and you try to build up around him during his rookie contract so that you're a contender by the last year and the fifth year option. Then the other side of it is you build the roster and you hope to drop in a good enough quarterback. That is literally the two different ways to do this. And we've seen successful teams win Super Bowls with both routes. I think it's harder to build up a good enough roster to have an average quarterback and drop the quarterback in that easily. But at the end of the day, both of them have worked. Both of them can work. And it's clear that the Raiders want to build up their roster. And even if Geno Smith is just a placeholder, and when you do take your swing on a quarterback, you're going to be in a better situation for that quarterback than you would have been if you did it early.
Yeah, I think you look at the Bengals as an example of a team that drafted the quarterback, built the roster around the quarterback on the rookie deal, got to a Super Bowl that way, didn't win, but got there. You look at the Rams as a team that they played in the Super Bowl that did the opposite. They built the roster, they plugged in Matthew Stafford. That was an example of plugging in the veteran quarterback. San Francisco 49ers, though, built their roster, felt like they had their quarterback, plugged in the rookie quarterback with Brock Purdy, went to a Super Bowl. There's ways to do this both ways. Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, another example of building the roster around
the Ravens roster has always been good for literally since they moved to Baltimore.
That's true.
It's been great.
Yeah, that is true. It has always been good. But I do think that they landed Lamar Jackson, got lucky in that situation to where he fell all the way to 32 and they were able to trade up for him. Still one of the most preposterous things I've seen across the NFL, but they did it. And then were able to build an even better roster around him and change the way that they played football because of him and around him and build that roster. So I would still put them in the category of team that found the most recent version of his success by building around its rookie quarterback.
Yeah, I think those are the two
Both
paths.
viable approaches.
The Raiders have chosen their path. I think for them, it's smart. Listen, Vegas seems like a big market, but it's not a huge person, and it's transient. It's not like a bunch of people live in Las Vegas who are in Vegas going to these games. So they need a team that's fun to watch so that people who maybe aren't Las Vegas Raiders fans or aren't from Las Vegas or from Oakland or whatever will want to go watch their team play. I think that's a big part of their business model. So it makes sense what they're doing and the way that they're going to do it. And I think picking Pete Carroll to kind of lead that renaissance is a smart thing as well for them. You need somebody who knows what they're doing after coming off Antonio Pierce, who I think will be a good coach. He's going to be a good coach, but maybe just wasn't quite ready for that, which we see all over the NFL. I mean, look at Tennessee. I don't think Brian Callahan is ready either. Right. So whatever. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. I am your host, the Madman Tyler Rowland, for my co-host, the Mastermind, Ross Jackson. As we tell you every episode, thanks for tuning in and stay safe out there, especially this weekend.